Hello and welcome in to Get Boosted on Shot Callers Esports. It's been a couple of weeks, but we're back in studio for another live show. First show of 2018, and here's hoping it's going to be a wonderful one. It's going to be a special show today because I am alone in studio. It's very quiet. My voice is very echoey, so I apologize to everyone watching or listening because you are going to get very tired of my voice today. We're going to be looking at the power rankings for the EU LCS. We finished up our NA ones last week, so we're moving on to EU as we're just over a week away from the LCS getting underway. And make sure you're sending in your questions throughout this show. We will be going over them at the end of the show, as we always do. I know you've probably forgotten the format of the show. It's been 2 weeks, but we'll be going over your questions later on, so send those in throughout the show. But we're going 10-1 today for EU on this live show, and you know what? Let's get right into it. Coming in at number 10, we have got the Giants Gaming squad. And if you haven't paid attention, this squad that came up through Challenger is totally different now. 4 of the 5 are not on the team anymore. Only Ruin remains in that top lane. And on first impressions, this roster doesn't look super solid. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Steelback on this team to carry a lot of these games. I mean, a guy like Betsy has been in the league for a while, but hasn't really showcased that main carry potential. Steelback has been the featured carry on his last couple rosters, really. He's been the guy that's looked to take over games and been the sole carry in a lot of these games. I just don't see him being able to do that against some of these other EU squads coming in. And really, there's not much synergy on this squad. There's a couple of guys like Joko and Steelback who have played together last split, but I mean, outside of that, there's not a whole lot of synergy going on with that squad. So I'd be hard-pressed to see them competing with a lot of these other squads coming into the EU LCS this split because, I mean, synergy is going to be a key with a lot of these teams, but I mean, every roster has made at least one change. So maybe it won't be as important, but I mean, just going on a purely talent basis, this team is probably going to be hanging out in the bottom 3. I think they'll probably be the bottom squad heading into 2018 spring split. Let's move on. Number 9. We're going right through all these playoff teams rather quickly. So number 9, we have got Roccat. They're coming in, and you've got a couple guys from NIP on there, Profit and HeQ, and obviously the Ninjas in Pajamas were pretty terrible last split, but these were the 2 standout performers on that squad. Now, is that going to be enough to translate to a lot of wins for these guys? Probably not. You've also got Norskrin there as support, who's a pretty hyped up guy. I was kind of excited to see him on maybe a better roster in 2018, but he's going to be hanging out on Roccat. And yeah, we're talking about Profit and HeQ. They, again, were the standout players on NIP, but again, that's not enough, I don't think, to keep up with some of these other EU rosters, and particularly that AD carry role. There are a lot of talented guys, whether it's veterans or some of these younger guys coming up. I don't see HeQ being able to keep up with some of these bottom lanes. Even with Sven and Mithy leaving EU, I think the bottom lane is going to be one of the most competitive lanes going forward in the EU LCS in 2018. And HeQ and Norskrin, they're going to be hard-pressed to keep up with a lot of these guys. But I mean, the organization, Roccat, they have it seems to be a fantastic backing and organization, coaching staff going forward. It's just, what are they going to be able to do with this roster? A guy like Blanc, who subbed in for G2 last split, he looked fantastic. He had some of the best KDAs in like 2 games played, and those G2 subs did win a couple of games for G2, but this is not as quite a supportive team around him as he had on G2. With someone like Sven and Mithy in the bottom lane, it's going to be a pretty big drop-off. Guy I haven't talked about, Memento, who had flashes of pretty stellar play, definitely above average in recent years in the LCS, so maybe that's a guy who really performs super well, and maybe Roccat finishes a little higher than that 9 spot, but I don't really see Roccat competing for a playoff spot in 2018 spring. Let's go on to number 8 because it's just so great. Coming at number 8, we've got the Unicorns of Love, who lost the 2 pillars of that organization in Vizichachi and Hillisang. They still have Sheepy as coach, but it's a very different looking roster. Only Exile and Samix remain from last split. Cold is obviously trashy. He overwent the old name change in the offseason. The main thing going into this split is going to be the play of Exile for UOL, because in summer he was not good. Not good. He was very questionable. He just was constantly disrespecting opposing teams' junglers and some of the other players, getting caught out a lot and having a lot of deaths. They need him to get back to Spring Split Exile, who was one of the top up-and-coming mid laners, and he looked fantastic, and that's one of the reasons that UOL got to the EU LCS finals in 2017 spring, but he looked like a totally different player in summer. So if Exile can get back to the performance that he put on in spring, then you know what? UOL probably finishes higher than the number 8 spot, but I don't know if they'll be able to do that. I mean, he hasn't had a super long career, so it's kind of hard to say what kind of player he actually is, because we just haven't seen that much out of him. But if he's not able to get back to that, then the Unicorns are probably going to struggle. I mean, a guy like Trashy is he's going to be a mid-tier jungler for them most likely. Obviously, Samix was fantastic and an MVP candidate last year. We'll see how he does with imported support in Totoro. We'll see what the communications issues are like with them going forward. But I got Unicorns coming in at number 8. Let's go on. We've got number 7. This is the last spot, not making it into the playoffs, but it'll be tight for them, and they'll be battling for that final playoff spot. It is Vitality. This roster took a long time to be announced. Yamato Cannon, head coach, kind of said there was a lot of hype coming into this team, and you see it, and it's just 4/5 of Giants. Now, that Giant squad did look pretty solid. A guy like Mini Trupax has a lot of hype and is going to be another potentially star AD carry for this squad. Cabo Shard, the only remaining member from last year's Vitality squad. So that's going to be a big veteran presence for them. But I mean, a lot of these guys on Giants, Gilius, another veteran, that's a lot of synergy you've got instantly with this squad. With 4/5 of the team, that's tied for Fnatic, for the most familiar lineup from last split. So we'll see if that synergy comes into play. Maybe they get out to some early wins in this split while other teams are kind of still dealing with some chemistry issues. But I mean, a guy like Jizuki and Mini Trupax, look to those guys. Those might be some featured AD carries. And Mini, I think, is definitely going to be one of these potentially star AD carries coming up. Him along with Upset, who we'll get to later on in these rankings, but I think both those guys are going to be up-and-coming AD carries. And Vitality, I think they could potentially get that last playoff spot, but it's going to be a hard-fought battle between them and the 6th place team, who we'll get to in just a minute. But Vitality, I mean, they've got a good coach in Yamato Cannon. He's very well-spoken, very seductive voice, which is something you always want to have with your coach. But I'm just not sure that the full talent is there to, again, compete with some of these upper EU LCS teams, because as ridiculous as the NA LCS was, and yeah, a lot of the key EU guys were leaving to go to NA, some of these EU rosters still look very solid, and I think overall this is going to be a much more competitive EU LCS than it was in 2017. So even making the playoffs is going to be a tough spot for a lot of these teams. Speaking of playoffs, coming in at number 6 and the first playoff spot in 2018 spring, I'm looking at H2K. And now when I initially saw this roster, I was like, oh, God, that is going to be bad. But, I've looked at it and just seeing the competition around it, and I really like the Santorin signing for H2K. I'm glad he got a spot on an LCS team. I was hoping he'd maybe get an NA one, but at least he got on EU, and it's a little absurd that he's now an import in his original region. But I mean, that's a great veteran leader that they have, a guy with Worlds experience. He's won some LCS titles in NA. But a guy like Smitty J and also Cadril in that mid lane are coming over with their coach, veteran from Schalke. So that's another little bit of inherent synergy and chemistry that these guys are going to have going forward. Formerly Spraddle and now Promiscu, also formerly played on Schalke. So that's a lot of inherent synergy that these guys are going to have pretty much immediately going into this split, which is something that is going to be really sought after, at least early on in these weeks, because like I said before, every roster dealing with some changes. Some rosters, 4 guys, 3 or 4 guys. Some are entirely new rosters. So there's going to be a long adjustment period for a lot of these teams. So having that already established relationship between coach and player and a couple of players on that squad is definitely going to help them out. And Cadril and a guy like Sheriff, initially I was like, who the hell's Sheriff? What is going to go on in these guys? Does he just police the team? Is he going to be the dad of the team? But no, he's a 17-year-old guy. He's born in the year 2000. That's right. We finally got guys playing in the LCS who are born outside of the 90s, which is absolutely insane and makes everyone else feel extremely old. Myself included. But this guy is going to be a player to watch in the EU LCS, and he's probably right now my front runner for Rookie of the Split heading into here, along with Upset. They're both going to have a lot of opportunities to carry on their squads. I think the only main concern with this H2K squad is that in-game leadership, because there is a lot of young talent, and most of that pressure is going to fall on Santorin, a guy who has played on plenty of super teams, mainly TSM. He's also played in the Challenger League in NA, where he's been more of a vocal leader on that. But on TSM, he didn't have to be that leader because he had such huge personalities on that team. So it's going to be a very big shift for him to be looked to as a leader on this squad, and we'll see how he can handle that pressure. But that 6th playoff spot is definitely going to be hard fought between H2K and Vitality, and I think it could go either way for them. Let's move on to number 5, or as you could say, the top 5, the 2nd playoff spot. I am looking at Splice. A lot of people calling this a super team in EU. Not quite a super team, I don't think. But I mean, they've got pretty solid guys at every roster, or at every spot. Otawamne was rumored to G2, but he actually wasn't really rumored to G2. It was very weird. I'm very curious to see how Kasing does. We haven't seen him in the LCS in a while. Obviously, when he was in there, he was one of the top EU supports, but it's been a while. Let's see if we can get back to that form. Niski, a guy coming over from NA who had some fantastic games like this one here against TSM with a Quadra to close out a win against them. He looked fantastic at times in NA. We'll see if he can continue to grow in EU. And obviously, Otawamne is a guy who, on this new roster, he might be playing more carry top laners like the Kummel you're seeing in this game, where, again, he gets a Quadra kill himself. I think he's already kind of spoken about how he's more open to playing more top laners, or more carry-oriented top laners. Usually he's playing for his team more so than, you know, maybe just playing champions he excels at. But I think he might be a little bit more selfish on this Vitality squad, and that's by no means a negative. I think he's just going to kind of put on the carry pants because he has that opportunity to do so on this roster. I think Kobe, whoa, butchered, I'm sorry, my friend. I think he's a pretty solid AD carry, but I mean, he's not going to be the guy who's going to super hard carry any of these games. He's more of your secondary carry on this squad. He's not going to make any big mistakes that are going to cost you the game. So we'll see how that bottom lane with him and Kasing goes. I think that could still be a pretty solid bottom duo. And again, that is going to be the most competitive role in the 2018 Spring Split in EU, is that bottom lane. It's pretty much even the 10th place or the worst bottom lane, I think is going to be a pretty solid squad. So I want some ISO streams on those 2v2s in that bottom lane. That's going to be very interesting. And guy I didn't even talk about is Xerxes, who struggled in 2017 summer, as did a lot of the guys on the Unicorns of Love. But if he gets back to his Rookie of the Split performance that he did in spring, then Splice maybe finishes a little higher than that 5th spot. But the top 4 in EU looks very good, very solid. And let's dive into that top 4. Coming in at number 4, it's Schalke FC, Vizicachi top lane, Pride Stalker jungler, Nuke Duck in the mid lane, Upset, and Vander in that bottom lane, who I think will be the best bottom lane in EU in 2018, and Upset and Vander. Upset is just, he dominates solo queue. He was fantastic in the challenger scene. That bottom lane is going to be rock solid, I think, for Schalke. And a guy like Nuke Duck, he had a very good performance in 2017 summer for a guy who was on a pretty subpar team. And, you know, he's basically been hyped up for 4 or 5 years now, ever since Lemon Dogs. And he doesn't ever really seem to fully deliver on that hype. But last year was actually one of his better splits as a professional since Lemon Dogs, really. And if he can really keep up the play that he had in summer on a much better roster than he had on Vitality, then I think you're looking at a top 3 mid in EU this year. Pride Stalker, a bit of question marks surrounding him. Obviously, on Roccat, again, he was playing on a much worse roster. I think now his lanes are stronger across the board, and really, he might have winning lanes in the majority of the games with this roster. So I think he's going to have just ample opportunity to get these lanes even more ahead, and just really, it's going to be an easier time for him. When your lanes are winning, it's a lot easier to play a jungle than when you're losing every lane, and every lane is calling out, you come gank my lane, come gank my lane. So Pride Stalker is probably going to have a much better experience playing League of Legends in 2018. Vizichachi, again, just another UOL guy who had a off split last year in 2017 summer. But again, new roster, new fuel, more inspired with all these new guys. I think Schalke, they might even finish higher than 4. I could see these guys maybe even getting to the EU LCS finals, or at least maybe getting into that 3rd spot. This team has a lot of potential, no doubt. And is Vander still up to LCS standards, the caliber that we're expecting out of him? I think he will be, and he's going to be a great mentor for Upset in that bottom lane. Look out for Schalke in 2018. All right, let's move in. Top 3, coming in at number 3. In case you haven't guessed it, it's basically the 3 Worlds teams from 2017 that are left on this list. And coming in at number 3, we got Misfits, the best performing Western team at Worlds in 2017. So why are they number 3? Well, they made a couple of roster moves. Obviously, Senkux and Mickey X coming in to replace Ignar and PoE, which maybe is a slight downgrade, but I don't think it's a huge drop-off in either of those roles. Senkux is a guy who can fill that mid lane pretty solidly. And Hans Sama, again, just another young AD carry who is going to be taking over this league soon. He was fantastic in their playoff run. He was solid, very solid in their Worlds run. And Max Lore completely turned around his season starting in Misfits' playoff run. And against SKT, he performed phenomenally and really showcased that he can be a world-class jungler. I'm a little hesitant to fully get on board the Misfits hype train going into 2018, just because for the majority, pretty much all of the summer regular season, they weren't that good. They were a mid-tier team. They were a game below 500, a series below 500. They weren't that impressive at all. So, and then it was basically 2 months, a month and a half, give or take, where they looked great against Fnatic, UOL at Worlds. They looked great. They got 3-0'd by G2, but we'll ignore that one for now. It's just, are they actually that solid? I don't know if we can fully believe how good this team is based off that month and a half, 2 month stretch, that they really are a perennial threat to take home the EU LCS crown split after split. But again, the offseason, yeah, it sucks you lose PoE and Ignar to 2 different regions, but I think they did a pretty solid job in shoring up those positions with a couple of Splice guys who were already familiar with playing each other. And sure, mid and support isn't the most important duo synergistic thing to have, but it still helps that they know each other's play style. They still have some communication, and they can definitely add to this Misfits lineup. And they still have Maxlore and Alfari, which were one of the strongest jungle top duos ending last split. And I think top lane's going to be a kind of relatively weak pool, that and support going into EU in 2018. So having a guy like Maxlore and Alfari where you can probably dominate the top half of the map will be pretty helpful for Misfits. But they're coming in number 3. Number 2, obviously we've got the old kings and the new kings of Europe left, and coming in at number 2, we have got G2 Esports with 4 new players. Sven and Mithy, gone. Expect, gone. Trick, gone. All that remains is Perks, and he's staying there till 2020, by the way. Obviously, Ocelot wants to build around the Kid Wonder in the mid lane. The biggest offseason signing, obviously, Jankos and Perks, Jerks, whatever you want to call them. They should be the best jungle mid lane duo in the LCS this split. People were a little disappointed that they signed Wonder instead of Otawamne when all those rumors were swirling. And yeah, Otawamne is probably better, but listen, Wonder put up some really solid performances for Splice, and he can play. He's got a pretty deep champion pool. You see the Rumble here with this absolutely absurd escape he had. He can play Gnar, he can play Kled, he can play these tanks, really whatever they need out of these guys. But the key to watch for G2 is obviously going to be Jankos coming over, and how is he going to work with Perkz? The First Blood King, Perkz, obviously was just being so aggressive in the second half of the summer split. And if he's getting ahead in these lanes and just getting out to these huge leads, and then you've already got Jankos coming in to join him and really just accelerating those leads, these guys should dominate that combo, especially, I mean, some of the top tier mid laners are going away. Febevin, PoE, they're gone. Froggen hasn't been there for a while. Xpeke retired. So, I mean, this is Perkz' year to really dominate that mid lane, and I mean, the pressure is on him because all these guys came to play with him. This roster is built around him. Obviously, Sharnan and Wadid, they were on a struggling Roccat team last split, and they did not look that great. It's hard when your team's struggling like that, but they were the best part of that Roccat squad. And we know that Sharnan, what he's done in the past when he's had a solid support that he's built a relationship with and established some synergy with Kasing. They were a fantastic bottom lane, and they are one of only two teams, or two bottom lanes, Sharnan and Wadid, who played together last split that are playing in this league. 80% of the teams have an entirely new bottom lane, so I mean, that's got to count for something for this G2 squad. Again, they're not Sven and Mithy, of course, but I think G2 did a pretty solid job with this offseason and putting together another roster that will give them a decent chance at claiming their 5th consecutive LCS title. And I mean, again, this is the year for Perkz to really showcase that he is a superstar player and one of the best mid laners in the West, let alone EU. And there's a good chance he'll take home MVP this year, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on him because people are saying, oh, well, Wonder and Sharnan will be better because Perkz will be taking away so much pressure from the jungler and all the other players on the team. So, I mean, that's a lot of pressure. He's going to have to really perform at the level that we saw during the second half of the split from Perkz, and I think he's capable of that. This is the year of Perkz, although really the last 2 years have been because he's won 4 straight splits. But more Perkz, more G2. I don't know if they'll win the split again, but I think they're definitely competitive and will probably get to the finals again. So here we are, number 1. If you haven't figured it out by now, that's kind of sad because there's only one left, and it's one of the most storied organizations in esports. It is Fnatic, who looked like they were going to dethrone G2 last split. They looked fantastic in the regular season, kind of fell apart in the playoffs, got back together in the regional gauntlet, got to Worlds, were terrible the first week, then were great the second week, got to quarterfinals. 4 out of 5 of the team is the exact same from last split. Adding in Hylissang to replace Jez's. This is the year where we've got to see some development from Caps and Broxa. At times, Caps was fantastic, and you can see the ceiling that this guy has with the outplay potential and just so talented. But there were games where that would get the best of him. He would get a little too over-aggressive, and he would cost his team. So we're looking at him and Broxa to just really develop more so. And I mean, getting to quarterfinals at Worlds is going to be pretty awesome for your development. So I think these guys are only going to get better. They've already got the synergy with 4 out of these 5 guys. And I got to say, bringing in a guy like Hylissang is a fantastic move for Fnatic. I mean, at times last year, the rare games that Fnatic would lose in the regular season and then during the playoffs when they looked a bit off was they got a little bit too passive in a lot of these games, and they just kind of let the other team walk over them a bit. You saw that Longzhu game at Worlds that was like 20 minutes. Longzhu only had 5 kills and you lose the game. I mean, that is incredible levels of passivity. So I think bringing in a guy like Hylissang, who he's not going to be passive. If you're sitting around for 20 minutes and there's not many kills, he's going to go flash in. That could obviously be an issue because he's just going to flash in over a turret and die instantly. But I think they work out the communication issues, the synergy with Hylissang. going forward, and I think it's only going to help this Fnatic squad. It's another veteran leader to help groom Caps and Broxa going forward. I mean, Soaz, Reckless, and Hylissang, these are guys who have been around for years, played in a bunch of EU LCS finals, been to Worlds, not Hylissang, but obviously Reckless and Soaz. So it's only going to help develop these guys, and again, a guy like Hylissang is going to be another shot caller you can add to the team who's not afraid to flash engage, which is exactly what Fnatic needs. And maybe it's a little boring to put Fnatic in G2 in that top 2 spots, but I mean, Fnatic, for one, they just made so few changes, and this team was absolutely blitzing the league during the regular season. It's hard to put them below number 1. I know they fell off during the playoffs, and that first week of Worlds was absolutely disgusting to watch. But I mean, you look how they rebounded from that, getting into quarterfinals. And against RNG, yeah, they lost in 4 games, but they should have won a couple of those games and have been at least forced a 5th game. And pretty much all the games in that series were really close. So I don't think they should be disappointed with that performance at all. And I don't think EU as a region should be disappointed with that. So it's hard to take Fnatic away from that top spot, even though they didn't win. Again, it's hard to not say Fnatic. And G2, yeah, it's 4 new players. So maybe 2 is a little high for them, but Perks, man. Perks and Jankos. Jankos, you know, maybe he's just got to sweep some of these teams in the playoffs, and then he doesn't have to worry about that 5th game where a little bit of the choke job comes out historically with H2K and that Roccat squad that he was on before. But playing alongside Perks, I think, is going to do wonders for him. No pun intended with that top lane. Make sure you're sending in those questions. We'll dive into these power rankings more. You guys can ask whatever you want, and I'll be answering them in just a couple of minutes. But I'm just excited for EU 2018. You know, after seeing the NA LCS and all these absolutely ridiculous moves, I mean, the EU still had a massive turnover as well. Like I said, 10 new rosters. I mean, at least one person has been changed on every roster. Only 2 returning bottom lanes from last split, which is insane. I mean, you got new coaches going around, guys like Crepo being involved with Schalke. And Schalke, for me, is the most interesting storyline and the most exciting team for me, because this team has a top 2 ceiling, I feel like. And if Nukeduck, this might finally be the year. I'm scared to say it because he's been hyped up for so many years, but I think this is finally the split where you see Nukeduck really perform to that potential that people have been waiting for the past couple of splits. He's finally surrounded by a pretty solid roster. He hasn't had that for a couple of years now, so I think he's really you're gonna see his true form, and he's gonna be one of these star players in this upcoming EU LCS. So look out for Schalke, and really it's the last 3 playoff spots, they could be up in the air. It's tough. It's a tough competition there, and I don't think even the bottom tier teams in EU this year, I don't think you're going to see the likes like a Mysterious Monkeys or an NIP. I don't think any of the teams in the league are that bad this year. So even Roccat and Giants, I think they're going to be getting a few wins, and they'll be able to take some games off pretty much any of the teams in the league. And that's kind of how EU goes a lot of the time. You see Roccat beating G2, beating Fnatic, despite having an 0-9, 0-13, whatever Faxi was in that game last year. So it's going to be very interesting. So don't give up on EU just yet. The EU region is still alive, and it's coming to you soon. Just over a week, starting Friday, January 19th, the first games are kicking off. So it's going to be very interesting, and make sure you're tuning in to those EU games. Let's get to some questions. That's the power rankings 10 to 1. Let's see what you guys are thinking, why you hate them, why you love them. Let's be honest. None of you are going to love them. No one loves them. I don't even love them. It was hard to think of them, you know? All right. Everybody's favorite time, question time. Should G2 have picked up Steelback instead? Maybe they could have picked up Steelback instead, but I mean, the Hjarn and Wudded chemistry that automatically comes in and synergy with those guys is something you can't knock. And I think I'd probably rather have Hjarnan than Steelback. I know Steelback has had some super solid performances on a couple different teams. You know, he's played on like 5 teams now. He's played on UOL, Roccat, Vitality, obviously started out on Fnatic. I think I'd rather have Hjarnan if I was G2. Josh E, thoughts on Levi's move to NA? Is it possible 100 Thieves could end up starting him in summer? I think that's a very real possibility that they're starting him. I think putting him on the academy team, that makes sense to kind of develop his English and his communication skills within the team and just kind of work with 100 Thieves as an organization. They couldn't put him on a starting roster right away, A, because he barely speaks English, and that would just be a detriment to the team. And B, you've already got your 2 imports in Ryu and Someday, so maybe in the off-season between spring and summer, they find a mid laner, a domestic mid laner that they can sub in for Ryu, because, let's face it, I don't see them getting rid of Someday going into summer, because he's going to be one of the top laners in NA, so they're probably not getting rid of him. So, thoughts on EU strength compared to NA? Listen, initially everyone was like, oh my God, EU's terrible. They lost 4 of their best players. 4, not 5. Lost 4 of their best players heading over to NA, so they're going to be terrible this year. But I mean, some of these top teams, again, the top 4 in G2, Fnatic, Misfits, and Schalke, I think, have pretty solid rosters. I mean, Fnatic, again, they swapped 1 player. They were a fantastic thing. I'm not taking anything from Rift Rivals, really. So I think NA's probably looking like a stronger region going into 2018, but I feel like we say that a lot. I think EU is still pretty solid, and I think overall the talent is a little more spread out, and even more so than NA, you're seeing a lot more young talent being developed in EU, which is kind of the theme. They develop in EU, become fantastic players, and then NA pays for them and they come over to NA. That's just kind of the theme of it, but there is a lot of young, exciting rookie talent to look out for heading into 2018. Who's your MVP for the EU spring split? I feel like it's a guy like Perks. I honestly do. I think this is the mid lane talent pool. It's basically going to be him and Caps, I think, are going to be your top 2 guys, with guys like Fevivin and PoE leaving for NA. I think Perks is really going to assert himself as the most dominant mid laner in EU. With the help of Jankos, I'm expecting some bonkers numbers out of G2's mid laner, and I think he's taking home MVP. How would you rank Reckless compared to the NA AD carries? I mean, NA, again, also has a lot of super solid AD carries. Right now in the West, AD carry is probably the most stacked position out of all of them. So I think he'd still be one of the top guys. You're probably I might even put him top 3, top 4 for sure, or hanging out with Sven and Mithy, probably in that area. But he'd still be a top tier guy in NA. And he had kind of mentioned that he had, thought about maybe going to NA. He had thought about going to China maybe. He'd even spoken to some Chinese teams, but ultimately decided to stay in Fnatic. I think Reckless could probably play in any region because he is that good a talent. EU bottom teams are way worse than NA's. However, I think the top 3 EU teams are better than the top 3 NA teams. Any thoughts? So if, let's say the bottom 3 in NA is probably, well, based on our power rankings, is going to look at Optic, Golden Guardians, and FlyQuest compared to EU, Giants, Roccat, and UOL. I don't know if they're way weaker than the NA ones, to be honest. I think Giants is significantly weaker probably than any of those other teams, NA or EU. But other than that, it might be somewhat comparable. Top 3, TSM, Liquid, C9 versus, you're looking at Misfits, G2, Fnatic. I feel like the top 2 in NA is probably a little better. But again, I think, yeah, they're pretty comparable. A team like Fnatic, I think, could, again, compete in NA. G2 could compete for that top spot in NA as well. Again, it's super hard to say because this G2 roster, 4/5 of it is entirely new. So we have no idea how they're going to actually perform on the Rift. But on paper, I think NA, the top, is a little stronger, but it's not a huge gap by any means. What do you think of Young Buck joining Fnatic? That's very interesting. I'm surprised G2 let go of him. I don't know if it was his decision. I don't know the full details on that. But, I mean, obviously he's a solid coach. He won 4 LCS splits. So he must know what he's doing to some degree. So I think that'll definitely help out Fnatic. And Fnatic, I mean, historically has had some of the best coaching staffs in the EU LCS. So I think adding a guy like Young Buck will definitely help. Their pick bans, which is something they had some questionable picks in some of the times when they were struggling. He's going to help them in that regard. And anytime you're adding another analytical mind or strategic mind to the team, it's only going to help to have some extra minds, voices with the team discussing things. Why do you think Upset Vander duo is better than Reckless Hylissang? I think Vander will be a better laner than Hylissang. I'm thinking just in lane who's going to be the best laning duo, and I'm thinking it's going to be Upset and Vander. Obviously, Reckless is a amazing team fighter, probably the best in EU, especially with Sven gone now. But I think Upset and Vander are just, they're going to really dominate the laning phase. Reckless and Jezz is not something, they weren't destroying guys in laning phase, except for that H2K series against Che and Nuclear. That was painful to watch. But for the most part, Fnatic wasn't dominating that bottom lane. It was in these team fights where Reckless was getting ahead. And Hylissang is definitely not a better laner than Jezz. I don't think. He might even be a little worse in lane than Jezz was. So I think Upset and Vander can really just escalate some of these leads in the laning phase. And Upset has the mechanical skill to carry in a lot of these team fights. The main question is Vander still at the level that we're accustomed to seeing him play? Because, I mean, with Vitality, he was okay. He wasn't a top-tier support, I don't think. So with a more solid roster around him, can he get back to that level? And I think he'll be able to, and I think that those two will be scary in 2018. What's your EU mid top 3? You got Perks. I'd throw Caps in there. And number 3... Ooh, who could you throw number 3? There's a lot of guys you could put. I'd probably put Nuke Duck. I think Nuke Duck's coming in number 3 there. He was a probably top 4 guy last year on a struggling Vitality squad, and now on a much better roster, he's going to have more free reign to do what he wants in that mid lane, and I think he rounds out the top 3 in EU, and they'll be pretty solid. That's for all the guys who have left EU, that's a pretty solid top 3 in that mid lane, especially considering if you consider Caps is going to continue to develop and do less mistakes in that mid lane, then that's a pretty solid top 3. What's your opinion on Vitality? They picked up the Giants roster, and I think they'll do better than 7th place. Again, I think they'll be hard-fought, in a hard-fought fight, that makes sense, with H2K for that final playoff spot. Maybe they can sneak in ahead of them. Yeah, they got 4/5 of Giants, so that is, again, instant synergy with that squad, but they don't have much LCS experience. The only guy out of that Giant squad that has LCS experience is Gilius. So you got Gilius and Cabochard who have a bunch of LCS experience, but then it's 3 unproven guys in terms of the LCS. And I mean, when your 2 main carries are those guys with no LCS experience, that's a lot of pressure on them to get into the playoffs in their very first split. Maybe in summer after an LCS split under their belt, they get into the playoffs, but I think they're going to just narrowly miss out on that this year. But, I mean, a guy like Yamato Cannon is a good guy to have for these inexperienced guys. He's going to be able to help develop and mentor them, but I think you might need a split of development before you see Vitality making it into playoffs. What do I think about Mini Troupax? I think he's going to be, I mean, look at all this young up-and-coming talent in the 80 carry spot. I'm going to say it again. You've got Mini on Vitality, Sheriff on H2K, and Upset on Schalke. I mean, those 3 guys, all going to be rookies this year. That's your rookie of the split race. It's going to be between 3 AD carries, and all of them have a very legitimate shot at taking home that award this year. And they're going to be pretty quickly near the top of the 80 carry standings, I think, going forward behind really like Reckless, Hansama. I think outside of that, they might be in that top 5, these 3 young rookies. It's a deep pool in that 80 carry position in EU. Which team did you think made the best trades, moves this offseason? I like Schalke. I like what G2 did. They got a mostly EU lineup outside of support, so I think they rebuilded pretty well on paper. But I really like what Schalke did, and it was kind of out of nowhere. They were one of the first teams to announce their squad, and it was like, oh, that's a pretty solid roster. Nukduck is on the best team that he's been on in many years. The only guy that Schalke kept from their challenger team was Upset, which is the guy to keep, by the way, the most promising talent on that squad. You pair him with Vander, a guy with a plethora of LCS experience. You basically got 3 veteran guys, and then your 2 younger, unproven guys in Pride Stalker and Upset. I think that's a good balance between veteran leadership and young up-and-coming talent, and I think they're going to be able to mentor those guys. Guys like Vander and Chachi are guys who have very clearly been vocal leaders on their previous teams, so that's really going to help out Pride Stalker and Upset, and I like what Schalke did. I like what Schalke did. What is the top 3 in the West? So NA and EU. I think TSM's got to be there. This team might fall flat on its face, which I can't see it happening, but that team on paper looks insane. I feel like Team Liquid, that's a win now more than any other roster in either league. There's no up-and-coming talent there. It's all proven guys. They're all at least, I think the youngest guy on that team is 22 years old, which I realize is very young. But when there's 17-year-olds and guys born outside of the 90s playing in the LCS right now, that's a veteran team when you've got 22-year-olds. So they're all experienced. They've all competed and, gone to Worlds, gotten to LCS finals, won LCS titles. So I'd probably put them in the top 3 as well. And then either Fnatic or G2, I don't know how to pick one for the third. I'd probably throw in Fnatic just because, the last performance we saw, their turnaround at Worlds, they knocked off Immortals, which is a lot of the guys on 3/5 of Team Liquid right now. So I'd probably go TSM, Team Liquid, and Fnatic if I'm going for the top 3 of both. What's Froggen's future? Well, he is not playing in 2018 Spring Split in NA or EU. It sounds like he's taking a split off to stream, which, by the way, this will be the first ever EU LCS, or not EU LCS, any LCS split with Froggen not on a roster. Since Season 3, he's been on a team somewhere, which is an absolutely insane stat, but he's not playing in 2018 Spring. We don't know what he's doing after that, but it sounds like he's just streaming for Spring. Maybe he'll make a comeback for Summer. I sure hope he does because he's a fantastic player. Love seeing him play in either LCS, either go back home to EU or stay in NA. I think he's worth an import slot. Most EU teams would be happy to have him. So I hope we're seeing him play in Summer, but we're not seeing him in Spring. With Soaz being vocally annoyed about Reckless being very emotional, will we see a Fnatic which will have internal dilemmas if they start to struggle as teams with Soaz usually do? A lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff you see with Soaz, or not Soaz, Fnatic, sorry, it doesn't seem like these guys have any, dislike or disdain for anyone. There was that kind of weird stretch where Reckless wasn't even living with the team. He was living like in his own apartment and was just coming to practice. And that kind of seemed a little bit weird for the relationships. But I mean, Reckless and Soaz have been playing together for years, way back in like 2014 with Fnatic. So I think they get along perfectly fine. I can't see there being any big issues behind the scenes with the team. I mean, you saw them struggle immensely, and there was maybe a little bit of drama, but they were able to completely turn it around at Worlds. And look, Soaz the first week of Worlds looked like he shouldn't have been playing in the Challenger Series in NA, and then the second week he was the MVP of the team and probably the best player in half the games that he played. So he is a very up and down guy, but his ups are very much worth the lows that you get with him. So Do you think Promise Q should get another chance after all the failures? You know, he hasn't been great in the LCS, and you got to wonder if there's not another young talent that you'd like to take a chance on, even out of solo queue, really. Bring in another guy born in the 2000s to come in instead of Promise Q. I would have liked to have seen someone, you know what you're going to get out of him, and it's not going to be a top-tier level of play from the support position. I would have liked to have seen them take a chance on a younger guy who maybe has a little bit more question marks about him, but has the potential to be a real star or a real playmaker for the team. So yeah, I think they could have gone a different route with him. What EU and NA teams might flop in the first few weeks? I mean, someone like G2, 4/5, a new roster. It's going to take time to develop that synergy. They might have some losses early on when they're still developing that chemistry. Who knows what to expect with this roster? Well, you expect them to do very well. That's what I expect, at least. But, I mean, that's more towards the end of the spring split. Early on, maybe they drop some losses to some teams you're not expecting them to lose to while they're still figuring things out. But eventually, I think they'll get back on track. In terms of NA, you could probably go with a lot of teams. TSM is a similar comparison to that of G2, where you got only 3/5 of an entirely new roster, and that bot lane already has synergy, much like with G2. But maybe Mike Young struggles early on. I think he might. There's going to be an immense amount of pressure on this 18-year-old kid to deliver on that TSM squad, and maybe he struggles early on with TSM. And Team Liquid, a team who you'd think would have a lot of synergy because there's all these different patterns where they've played together. Doublelift's played with Pobelter and Xmithy. Xmithy's played with Pobelter and Ole from last season. But will this team come together right away? They should have a firm grasp on how to play pretty quickly because they're all experienced veterans, but maybe that team struggles a little bit as well. But basically any team in any of the regions might struggle early on because there's just so many roster changes and so many things to adapt to that the first couple of weeks in particular are going to be insane. What's your biggest concern specifically regarding the region as a whole with the development of EU considering the underwhelming rosters against NA? I don't think there's any really huge concerns. I mean, you've seen this to a lesser degree almost every year. Some of these guys leave EU to go to NA for brighter pastures, more money, whatever it is. And EU just continues to groom talent. I mean, I've talked about all the 80 carries that are coming up. There's some other roles where these young guys are coming up, and EU puts faith in grooming these young guys out of solo queue, and they become stars of the league. So even with all the turnover to guys going to NA, I don't think EU as a region needs to be that concerned. And as long as you got faces like Reckless, Perks, Yankos in the EU LCS, then you still got a huge fan base there, and I think they'll be okay. I think they'll be okay. Do you think H2K has the potential of surprising and reaching top 4? Ooh, that top 4, it's tough. I think it's going to be tough for teams to break into that top 4. I could see H2K maybe getting 5th, taking that away from Splice, but I don't know if they can break into that top 4. But I do like the balance between a veteran guy in Santorin and Sheriff and Cadril in that mid lane. I think that's another example of a young guy who maybe the EU mids meme will come up with Cadril really showcasing what he's able to do. And a guy like Santorin is going to be able to be more aggressive, as he has been since his days on TSM. The Ward memes have died since he left TSM. So maybe they can get up to 5th, but I don't see them breaking that top 4. Do you think Piglet on the Academy team is good for Clutch Gaming? It's interesting. I got to think the main reason they're doing that is because Piglet is 2 splits away from NA residency, which means when he's not taking up an import slot, I think a lot of LCS teams, maybe even Clutch themselves, will consider him for their starting roster, and teams will pay some money for him. I'm sure guys are still making decent money on that Academy team. So Piglet's just kind of got to stick it out on that Clutch squad. And I mean, that's going to draw some eyes to Clutch's Academy team to have a huge name like Piglet on that squad. Will he be happy playing in that lesser region or lesser league? Who knows? Maybe he won't like it. Maybe he won't be there for summer. But he's 2 splits away. He's so close to NA residency that I got to believe that's why Clutch is doing this. They're thinking ahead and maybe bringing him to their starting roster or selling him off somewhere else for big money to start on someone else's team. What do you think of EU going to 24 teams? Thankfully, they're not doing that next year. Next year is the franchising. They decided to follow the suit of NA. I did not like that 24 EU teams idea. There's not enough talent to have that many teams. So I'm glad they decided to change their route and go back to franchising. And when they do go to franchising, you might see some of these EU players going back to EU from NA. Do you think Santorin will perform well, or will he just perform really badly? I don't think he'll perform really badly. He looked great on Gold Coin United for the most part in that challenger scene. And listen, I got all the respect in the world for this guy. After leaving TSM, most of these guys, they leave TSM and their careers die, except for Amazing, who went to Origin and was great. We won't count that one. So good for him that he has been grinding out in the NA challenger scene, been one of the top junglers in there, and he has worked his butt off, and he's deserved a starting spot on an LCS squad. So I'm happy for him to get onto H2K, and I think he's got a lot to work with on that squad with Cadril and Sheriff, and even Smitty J had some great moments with Schalke in the challenger scene. So I think he'll perform pretty well, and he'll definitely be on the top half of junglers in EU 2018. What made you rate this H2K squad so high? There were so many rumors about how H2K don't care about LCS anymore. Any thoughts on that? I do recall that, and listen, I initially, when they had announced Sheriff and Cadril, I initially was like, I don't know who those guys are. And that's partially on me. Sheriff has pretty much no exposure to anyone yet, but Cadril, watching some of his games now on Schalke, he's a pretty solid mid laner, and again, some young talent that's coming up. H2K, maybe they don't care about the LCS, but I mean, that roster's not so bad. Outside of Promise Q in that bottom lane, that I'm not a fan of. But I mean, I again like the balance between some young talent and then a guy like Santorin in the jungler. I like that they've got the Schalke bond of Cadril and the coach and Smitty J, coach veteran. So there's already that inherent chemistry and communication that these guys are going to have, and that's going to count for a lot to start this split. If you get out to a quick lead, a lot of wins early on in this split when a lot of the teams are probably still figuring things out, that's going to help your playoff hopes quite a bit. And I think they sneak in to that 6th spot, that final playoff spot. What team is your dark horse to make a run into playoffs? I mean, dark horse to maybe actually squeak into playoffs would be Unicorns, if Exile gets back to playing at the level we saw in spring. But I don't see that happening, so I don't see them making playoffs. I think a team like Schalke, I don't know if it's really a dark horse if we have them at number 4, but I think they could have a legitimate chance to take home the EU LCS title. So that's a dark horse to win the title. Title to squeak into playoffs is the Unicorns of Love. Do you think that not franchising is hurting EU and it will bleed out even more players next split? Maybe. I think the main changeover is you saw this offseason. For the remaining EU players that are sticking it out, big name guys like Perks and Reckless, I think they're clearly sticking it out until franchising. I don't think guys will leave for one split. One franchising is already coming back next year. I think the main damage was done this offseason to the region, but with it around the corner, again, guys like Febevin, Sven and Mithy, PoE, maybe they come back in 2019 for franchising. So I don't think you'll see too many leave after spring, unless, I mean, maybe G2 is horrible and Yanko says, get me the hell out of here, and goes to NA, but I don't think you're going to see a lot of changeover from spring to summer. I think guys are committed for the full year, and if they're committed for that, well, you might as well stick around for franchising. Will Giants finally show up? Now, is that the Giants roster who we have at 10th, or 4/5 of the original Giants roster that is now Team Vitality? Because I think Vitality will potentially show up. We got them at 7. I think maybe they can get into that 6th spot, maybe beat out H2K. The Giants, who we got at 10th with Betsy, Steelback, and the lot there, I don't think they show up. I think maybe they'll get some wins. They won't be as bad as NIP or Mysterious Monkeys, but I can't see them not finishing bottom 2 in the upcoming split because the teams are looking pretty good. Can any of the EU coaches win Coach of the Split because Prawley is gone now? Yeah, listen, pretty much every coach in the league has their work cut out for them in both EU and NA. Pretty much any team that surprises or surpasses expectations their coach should get some looks for Coach of the Year. I mean, G2 grabs new coach there, 4/5 a new roster. If they win, he's probably getting Coach of the Year. Basically, whoever wins is getting Coach of the Year, or who finishes top 2. You got to finish top 2 to get Coach of the Year, it seems like, which I don't know if I agree with that mentality, but yeah, it's way up in the air because every team is going to be working pretty hard. Do you think Fnatic can challenge top teams in NA in the spring split? I think they could. I think they could contend for top 3 if they were to play in NA. I don't know what the deal is. Is there a Rift Rivals Part 2? I mean, it was fun. I think people took too much out of it, but it was a fun event. So I'd like to see some more EU NA stuff like that to see if these guys really can, how these guys actually match up internationally. But I think Fnatic could compete with the top 3. Hey, Shot Callers Esports. Hello. Thank you for watching. How high in Worlds do you think the West will go? I like to believe and say semis. I seem to say that every year. I like to say semis as a kind of golden hope, a cloud that we can dream on where they reach there. So I'll set the hopes very high and semis there. But again, it's a lot of luck with the draw that you're getting. You saw this year G2 got pretty screwed over with their group. It was definitely not ideal. Other guys like Immortals and Fnatic got a really solid draw. Misfits was okay. Cloud9 was okay. If you can get first out of your group, that's your best chance at getting to semis. And I think a team from the West might be able to do that this year. But Worlds is a long ways away. These might even be totally different rosters come summertime. All right, last one for the day. What is your EU Dream Team? Now, EU Dream Team, I assume, means domestic EU players, no imports. So I'm taking Perks and Yankos right away. Give me Reckless in the bottom lane. Support, whew, that's tough now. It's a shallow support pool now with guys like Mythy gone, Ignar's gone. Who would I take as support? I might take someone like Vander. Oh, I don't know if I want that. I might take Vander as my EU support, and then in top lane, give me Otawamne. I want Otawamne. So Otawamne, Yankos, Perks, Reckless, and Vander. That's a pretty solid team. I think they could compete with some stuff. That's it. That's all the questions. Thank you very much for sending them as always, and thank you for sticking with us after our 2-week hiatus coming back. We appreciate having you guys in here as always. We will be back on Wednesday for a live show. I'm going to be joined by Mark Horner in studio, so you won't have to listen to my annoying voice for the entire show again. We'll be back for 5v5 live Wednesday at 2 p.m. Make sure you guys are subscribing on YouTube and Twitter at Shot Callers Esports. We already did our NA Power Rankings. Our EU Power Rankings are now done. They'll be going up on YouTube. Listen, for everyone who's saying EU's dead and there's no point in even watching the region anymore because so many guys left, there's still plenty of personality in EU. And listen, there was a huge roster overhaul just like NA. It's going to be maybe not as interesting, but it's still going to be super interesting heading into 2018. So make sure you're checking out the EU LCS games coming up in Spring Split. We will be back on Wednesday, 2 p.m., myself and Mark Horner, 5v5 Live. Make sure you guys are checking it out. Thank you again for all the questions. Thank you very much for watching and always giving us support on the channel. And we will see you guys on Wednesday.